Wes and Ted's Excellent Conversation, a podcast about teaching, learning, and anything else that pops into Wes and Ted's heads.
Hi, everybody. I'm
Very natural, Ted. I like it. That's good. I like it. It's really good. So, all right. So, I'm currently talking with Ted Dorsey, the brain. Not the brainchild. You're the brain parent.
Brain trust. Yeah.
Brain trust. You're the guy who made up
the brain behind.
Ted, the brain behind. I like this. Tutor Ted. The LA-based, although really you live on the internet. You're not really
I'm not in LA now, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. So Tutor Ted, bringing SAT and ACT excellence to you since time immemorial, and in a non-boring way. Non-boring test preps. It's since 2000, yeah? 2000?
Yeah, 2000 was the first year. I think I might have actually started 99, but 2000 just sounds so fun.
It does.
Yeah, but that was the year I first started tutoring ever.
And I'll also just point out Ted, who's been a friend of mine for years, is also one of my favorite brainstorming partners. And I know that the interesting part for most of the people watching will be your SAT and ACT prowess and your teaching prowess, of course. But the fact that I think that you're a really agile and deep thinker is why I wanted to do this podcast with you, and I think it's a super relevant thing.
Wow, I did not expect a compliment. I mean, Wes is, not that Wes does not give compliments. I just didn't know we were going to record it.
Oh, sorry.
I sincerely appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah,
I love brainstorming. And before I get to Wes, I'm just going to say one thing about brainstorming, which is the key. The most important thing to me is when you brainstorm that you don't critique. You do not critique. You do not say why people won't like something. You don't say why people won't be interested in it. You just...
I like it.
You just say ideas. So that's part of it.
I like it.
The man on the other screen, probably to my left, possibly to my right, but I think he'll be on my left when I edit this, is Wes Carroll at wescarroll.com, RRL. And Wes is I would say mathematical genius. He is a professional tutor of not only math, but problem solving. He himself is a creative problem solver. And he's got like these two separate skills that I think are essential to someone being an amazing tutor. One, like an absolutely 3-dimensional, maybe 7-dimensional knowledge of the subject matter, right? Like inside and out, every way you could possibly understand something, he understands it. And then also he's a tremendous communicator, and able to, see what a student sees and what they know and help them kind of get to a fuller, better understanding. So he's got the skills for sure. I'm going to leave off for now the fact that he's a champion, literally champion beatboxer. And also champion problem solver. We'll leave those for some other time.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And I think you well know that there's a third skill, and I think we both kind of take this for granted in ourselves. But it's the ability to see into someone else's mind and understand what their understanding is, so that you can, right? And that's not just intellectual; it's emotional as well, right? Understand what that person is doing, which makes this conversation super interesting. In that, I'm focused on you, not on the audience, because of course, we don't see the audience. I'm hoping that people write in with questions and stuff, because that'll help too. But it's so normal for us to be sort of diagnosticians, and it's not normal for us to be lecturers or interviewers. And so this has kind of a behind the scenes vibe for me that I really enjoy.
Yeah, totally behind the scenes, and also like we're going into we're taking on different roles. Like we're both the students and both the teachers in this moment. Yeah,
for sure.
And then and it's also the backstage chatter. And speaking of chatter, I just have to because this crossed my mind, and I just have to share it. So my hair is all wet, and I have to explain why my hair is all wet because
you have to.
I have to. Because it. Part of it is that it's part of my branding. In fact, now there's this guy, right?
Wet hair is part of your brand. Oh, I see what you mean. The hair is part of. Okay, yeah, I got it. Yeah.
So that's a self-portrait, right?
Yeah.
That's me, but now you can see that's not happening right now. It's all kind of wet in the back, and it's because I just took a shower and because I don't plan well enough ahead of in advance to have my hair be dry in time for the podcast.
Sure.
But also I had to take a shower because this is the fun fact. This is the fun fact
that better be good.
Makes the viewer embrace me more as a person. This is all just really hitting the nail on the head. sorry, I'm such a dork, is that I was on the farm today. I'm a farmer. And like, who would have guessed that? Would you have guessed?
You don't mean farming ACT scores. You mean it in a more literal working the land sort of sense.
That's exactly what I mean.
That is very strange to me.
Picking vegetables. I mean, packing vegetables and fruits and eating them and petting the farm kitty whose name is Bullseye. But I just thought that was an interesting thing. It's like, how many people know that Tutor Ted is also Farmer Ted?
I like that. Yeah, it's good. Yeah. That is good. Yeah. I'm going to there we go. So you escaped LA in order to get out of the stress of being in the big city and the traffic and all that kind of good stuff?
Yes, that's exactly it. And made that decision in 2019 and I'm up in the Santa Ynez Valley area, which is, very beautiful, very agricultural, viticultural. We actually did our grape harvest last weekend, which is pretty fun.
So segue warning. I think that this actually is very germane to the topic we promised each other we would talk about. Whether we get around to it is another matter entirely.
We're going to get to the topic, folks. I promise.
Yeah. But I think there's a lot to be said for the idea of, hey, circumstances change, your internal circumstance change, and to keep going with the plan that you had is not necessarily the right plan. I mean, you need to be flexible. Right. You need to say, you know what, I was living in LA for reasons that were good at the time that I decided to move there. Those reasons have changed, and so I'm going to change my circumstance as well. I mean, that is what we are all living with here in the time of COVID-19 is we've got a bunch of systems in place, a bunch of processes, a bunch of plans, a bunch of expectations, interpersonal, systemic, all this kind of stuff. And they... Well, you can argue whether they all made sense or whatever, but, generally speaking, they were getting the job done, at least to some degree.
Right.
But now we're in a different circumstance, and some of those decisions just don't work anymore. And we're seeing some second order effects of that. We're seeing, we've got to switch this thing. Okay, we'll just switch this other thing in response. And it's like, oh yeah, but that also changes all these other things that we didn't really think about, because who can think through an entire system, like that over the course of weeks as this whole thing was unfolding. Anyway,
so that's absolutely like a great kickoff to the conversation. So the topic that we like sort of agreed on is we're on the same topic. It's the title that Wes and I sort of agreed on is learning under COVID-19.
Right.
And my point was basically this is the issue. This is the the kind of core central. Everyone understands that this is happening and that this is challenging, and so it'll relate well. And Wes's point was,
that was my cue, right? So originally we had called this distraction and focus,
right.
But to me it's a much bigger deal, right? To me it's owning your own learning. It's owning your own mind. It's being in charge of your own mental processes. And when I say it that way, it's like, well, of course you're in charge of your own mental processes. And what I have found in myself and in my students is that that's not true. That's not how it goes. Like there's a whole herd of cats in there, and they're all kind of going the directions they want to go. And to get everyone's attention in one place at one time is a very difficult thing to do. And we see that
impossible. I would say it's impossible.
Yeah, I think that might be fair. Yeah, you can get some of the attention some of the time, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We see this in students who have ADHD diagnoses and stuff like this, but what we tend to downplay or not notice is that what we see in ADHD, again, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I don't mean to be talking about what ADHD is, but I just mean that, just as a lay person, right? When you see someone with that diagnosis.
And you're more than a lay person because you actually have on the ground experience. You have students.
I guess that's fair. But I just don't. Yeah. Thank you. But it's very common for us to fall into this very sensible seeming frame of like, okay, I am sort of neurotypical, and I've got a normal amount of focus or normal amount of distraction or whatever, and this person with the diagnosis, they're kind of off to the side or what, however it is that you think of it, right inside your innermost thoughts. But the fact of it is, when you really look at it, it's like we're all on that continuum, and none of us are as focused as we think we are. I think about some of the truly great intellects of history, and I think in some of those cases, it's not that they were geniuses; it's that they had a singular level of focus, which in many cases was a function of their environment as much as anything else. And so I feel like. it's really easy to say, oh gosh, well, COVID-19, it's pulling all our focus away and it's becoming too easy to become a distraction and stuff. And I totally agree with all those things. But to me, it's not like COVID-19 created these problems. It's just exacerbating the problems that were already there. In fact, it's shining a spotlight on some of the problems. And in fact, some kids are finding that, Zoom school or whatever is working out real well for them, and their focus levels are just as high as they were before and all that kind of good stuff.
And they may be like audio learners, verbal learners, people who
Ooh,
can.
It's been debunked. I'm sorry to say it.
Really?
The whole business. Yeah. Yeah. The notion that you have kinesthetic learners, and I totally just alienated half the people watching this. I'm so sorry, but I did come across research that made this point real strongly. And yet what it didn't debunk, and what I think we still agree is true, is that if you're really used to learning in a particular modality, okay, you're going to be more comfortable there and you're going to have more support skills there. So in some sense, while brains aren't visual learners, audio learners, whatever, your experience can make you prefer one. I'm sorry, I'm a total.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, so what's been debunked is that certain brains are built for certain ways of operating.
Yeah, there's no such thing as an audio learner. There's no such thing as a visual learner, but there is such thing as, look, I've had the self-perception that I'm a visual learner, and therefore I've taken care to make sure that all my learning is in the visual way, and therefore I've built up support skills and comfort in learning in that way.
Right.
Okay, sure, that's legit. You may have a preference.
Right.
But it's not like, oh yeah, no, I'm hobbled when it comes to learning things in an audio. It's like, no, you practice, you'll be fine. You have that level of neuroplasticity.
That's great. I love neuroplasticity. I think it's a really interesting point. You are now on the hook to provide a link to the research in the comments, just because I think all of us want to see that for sure.
Yeah, sure. I will.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think the central kind of issue that we're trying to get at, basically, and here's a random cliche that I thought of this morning I love it. Every system is perfectly designed to create the output that it creates, right? So from, like a top-notch working, organization that does everything exactly the way they want to do it, to a discombobulated business that's about to go bankrupt and lose all of their I don't know, their employees or whatever. Both systems were designed perfectly to achieve that outcome. So here's my point. When it came to conventional schooling, we knew what went in and we knew what came out, and we didn't make very big adjustments to it because we were pretty happy with what came out. You send kids to college, based on their GPA and test scores, and some kids do really well and some kids are left behind. And there were minor adjustments that were proposed here and there. We went and we started doing charter schools, and there was some chatter about sort of the Finnish model and the Japanese model, and trying different ways and different methods of teaching. And we never really fully adopted anything too crazy, because we were pretty comfortable with the results we were getting. You know what I mean?
I see. Yeah.
And then the problem with COVID is that we were actually trying to use the same methods to get to that outcome, right? It was like, kind of like backed it up from there and said like, hey, we want to achieve the same outcome. How do we do that? We do the same things we've always been doing, except we're doing it online, except the students aren't there, except the student is sitting in the same exact spot this entire time. There are things under the COVID model, there are like major aspects to schooling that might surprise you that are omitted 100%. For example, socialization, being with other students in the room and having a chance to interact. This is education, by the way. You know what I mean? It's not the same. It's not the kind of education you get graded on, but it's a major part of what happens during schooling.
It's the quote of, this new remote learning model is all the things I don't like about school and none of the things that I do like. That's a quote that I've heard. I'm certainly not surprising some students that have that experience. Also, not just socialization in the broad, but also in the sense of positive social pressure. I'm sitting in class, right? I'm feeling fidgety. I'm kind of tuning out, whatever. I look around and my buddy is paying attention, and I look over at his desk to see what he's doing. He's taking notes, and I read some of his notes, and it's like, oh, that's what the teacher's talking about. Okay, I'm back on board. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm alone in a room, I don't have that
another one about the room for me is novelty. Actually, going into a classroom, having a teacher, all my students, they're sitting around in the same room, and I see them and I'm like, that's when I'm working with them for test prep, which is, normally what I'm doing, I'm I'm realizing that's where they've been sitting all day.
Yeah.
I'm seeing them after school, and now we're just extending that by an hour and a half. So,
Well, also,
yeah,
it's the business of your body is not just a mechanism for getting your brain from room to room. I mean, we are embodied intelligences, right? They're like, it's not brain plus some other stuff.
hmm
There's a lot that changes in our mentation, as a function of what we've eaten, how much exercise we've had, how much novelty we've been exposed to. There's all these different inputs that we've been trained to ignore, but there are systems running on our wetware that don't ignore that stuff. That it matters. It makes up part of how you think. And when you change all the rules like that, you're going to change the quality of mentation, not necessarily for the ill, but it's going to change. And if your
right,
system is tuned to do a particular thing a particular way in a particular circumstance, and you go changing half the rules, you
right.
can't be surprised when things get rickety.
And we were somewhat satisfied with the ends. You know what I mean? We were like,
Well,
yeah,
the
pretty
quote I heard
happy.
earlier today, which I think it's funny because it's true, right? School for decades, school has done a great job of training people to take on the jobs of 1953. you know, but it was never designed to kindle love of learning. To get into something you're interested in, to do any of the things that we as tutors are often engaged with, but that schools just it's not in the charter, as it were.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
So I feel like we've got this opportunity, and oh, what's the word for it? Like important moment, gauntlet.
okay.
I don't know, like this decision making moment where we have to say, okay, what do we want to accomplish? What is the goal? Is the old goal still the goal we want? Um, if it is, we need to figure out new ways to accomplish it. Like working around COVID, right?
Oh,
If
this is
it's not what we want,
yeah.
right? And if we want to adjust it, then here's our opportunity to propose a new model, a new way to do it. Because
Oh,
the
see,
old model isn't accomplishing the old goal, so we can't stick with the old system. We just can't.
I think there's a shortcut here. Um, I think that we can bypass that question and get at something different, which is not how do we fix the system or how do we redesign the system, but rather what is a sensible response to the current state of the system as a single stakeholder. Okay. In other
Okay.
words, not how can I, theoretically improve this system moving forward. Very valuable question. Super psyched to have that discussion. But I'm suggesting a different position is how can I, a parent, work within the system as it exists today, warts and all, to get a good outcome for my kid and for my community? I feel like that's something we can engage with because that's a problem we solve for our families more or less every day, right?
I agree. I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. And that makes perfect sense. Can you do that? Can you solve that problem from separate places? You know what I mean? So basically the parent has their perspective on it in terms of how
Sure.
to solve it. The student may or may not have their own perspective. The teachers would have their own perspective and administrators would have theirs. So like to
Yeah,
me, I
yeah.
wonder, do you need like a top down approach
I'm gonna
instead?
run down. I'm gonna run down the stakeholder list.
Okay.
And now some of this, I'm totally making this up. So if I say some really dumb stuff, I'm counting on you to cut me off and
We'll
make me
see.
sound less stupid. But
hmm
so I'll start with kind of the tough one, the administrators, right? There are certain rules that have been put in place that were put in place because schools have been around more or less the same way for decades, and so you can sort of ossify certain things that need to be done in particular ways in order to get to certain outcomes, right? If you have a test-centered school, right, and you're doing a lot of standardized testing or whatever, then those scores need to be within a certain score range or your school gets defunded. There's stuff like that going on, right?
Right,
And
right.
and and say what you will about these rules, bottom line is they don't make as much sense in the time of great change as they do in a time of great stability.
Absolutely.
So there's going to be some scrambling that's going on there. Also, we're seeing a lot of issues for administrators these days that come down to fundamental income, or I shouldn't say income, wealth inequality, right?
hmm
Resource inequality. The
hmm
fact that, you know, when every kid in a household has his or her own device and you have solid internet, and the parent isn't completely stressed out. I mean, I know those families exist, but not too many of them. I mean, there's a lot of ifs there, right? But that's a very different situation from needing to go to the library to get reliable internet, or, having to share the device, or having a parent who's, working two jobs and trying to, I mean, there's a wide range there.
Mhm.
So I think from the administrator point of view, it's a tough year, and you're going to see a lot of things that administrators do that are going to seem kind of insane. And every time every time I hear something from a school administrator, and I think, well, geez, that's wrong-headed, I try to check myself and remember, okay, the rules that they are being forced to play by just are not sensible rules here, and they're doing the best they can. And like,
Yeah,
okay, that's
yeah,
fine.
yeah, yeah.
So that's one.
They're flying a little, not totally blind, but without any preparation for this particular situation.
Yeah, and in fact, one I won't name check, but the superintendent of schools local to me has been sending out these emails that I think are really, really well thought through,
Hmm.
and I got to give the guy credit, because well thought through is the best you can do in a time like this.
Yeah.
It's not like there's this super deep playbook that it's like, you think it through, and do the
And
best you
sometimes
can.
well thought through in this situation is we don't know where this is headed. You know what I mean? Like we
Right.
don't know, we don't know what it's
For
going to look
sure.
like in 3
For sure.
months. Yeah.
So moving down the list of stakeholders, right? Teachers
Yeah.
are next up, and they're dealing with a lesser version of the same kind of problem, which is that they're trying to keep a bunch of different people happy, right? There's the union, there's the administrators, there's the parents, there's the students themselves, and I suppose there's their peers, and there's all this other stuff, and themselves, right? And I think that one thing we see again and again, right, is that there's the mechanistic role of being a teacher, where you need to accomplish certain things. You need to, I'll just leave it there. And then there's the human part, where, you are a person who got into this profession, presumably because you want to help a bunch of people, and you've got a bunch of people in front of you, and you're going to do the best you can in that moment. You've got training, you've got experience, and you've got liabilities, and, whatever, whether they be budgetary or attention or whatever, and you're just going to do the best you can. So again, I think that, the big issue that I'm seeing for teachers right now isn't that, hey, I'm doing this class over Zoom. I mean, that is an issue, right? There's a different set of skills there. But I think the bigger issue is, I'm working with a bunch of kids who don't have as much support as they normally do, and I'm not able to offer as much support as I normally can, because I can't reach through the screen and give that kid a snack, and I can't, there's just all these different, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then we get down to parents and students, and if I can group those together under the heading families for a second,
Mm-hmm.
the way I see this is, whatever it is, whatever class you're taking this year is probably going to get repeated in whole or in part in future years. In other words, no one taking pre-calculus right now is going to go into a calculus class next year where it's going to move at the same speed a calculus class normally does, because even if school is 100% back to where it was, everyone recognizes that everyone did not get a full year of pre-calculus this year. Now,
Yes.
I don't mean to be stoking fears here. I'm not trying to do anything of that sort. I'm just acknowledging the reality that there was a big bump in the road, and it's taking us time to correct for it, right? But
Can I jump in with a little bit of cynicism?
Sure.
So I agree with you. I don't think people are adjusting on the fly as well as they ought to be. You know what I mean? I think that I ask my students about how their teachers are teaching now versus in the spring, right? Because in April and May, it's like they had very, very little forewarning, and they were, trying to do things the same old way. And some teachers have adapted to teaching online, and other ones have not in the fall. You know what I mean? Some have gotten better, and some haven't. The schedule has changed for some students, and for some it hasn't. So I don't know if there's going to be enough widespread recognition of the fact that the entire school year was disrupted. You know what I mean? Like I agree with you. I think we basically pressed pause on a generation of learning, and we're going to have to make it up, and everyone's going to be sort of a year or so behind.
That's not my conclusion, actually, but I agree with all the building blocks you're laying out on the table, but I'm going to build it into a different conclusion here by the end, I think.
Sure. But I don't think that conclusion is going to be widespread enough that there will actually be action to remedy that. I think that they'll just throw kids into the next year of schooling, and you'll move from algebra 2 to pre-calc, and good luck to you.
Well, but some of those forces that are in place, like we talked about before, like I lectured at you before, the administrators and all the teachers and the various sort of objective. Let's make it as easy as possible, right? A given teacher has a particular average score that their students get on the AP Calculus AB exam, right? Like a calculus teacher's average score, that's a known quantity, right? We know what that is. And we can slice and dice that and we can say that it does or doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, the data's there, okay? We know what's happening there. And that's one of the places where that's a rubber meets the road place for teachers and administrators. It's like next year, if you had an average of 3.8 and it drops to 3.1, that's kind of on you. And you can rightly say, look, my students weren't prepared, right? You're not wrong, but it's still your problem.
Yeah, but I mean, I think people will recognize, oh, that's not on the teacher. You know what I mean? If you have an N of, say, I don't know, 30 students or more, and you're teaching an AP class and you went down by that much, you'd have to say there's some external factor. You know what I mean? It's like, oh no, you got 0.7 of a point worse, across the board. I think that those teachers are still the same as they were, and they're working with less.
Well, okay, but there are a lot of interconnected systems here, and it's not just school, but there's also sort of the school to corporation pipeline, school to career pipeline, right? If you want to call it that, where, what's going to happen, right? I'm going to be reading a resume of a job applicant, and I'm going to be like, oh, you were part of the COVID year. Okay, well, I'm going to lower my expectations of how much, schooling you've had or how much about, statistics or whatever.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what are the problems and what are the solutions. One thing we're pointing, like the most obvious thing we're pointing to right now is like mastery of content. Okay, I'm going to
take that as my pivot because I'm still trying. I'm still trying to build to someplace other than where it seems like we're going here. Okay, so I agree with you that if that's the frame, if mastery of content is the frame, then there's going to come a time when you're going to need to just suck it up over the summer and learn the pre-calculus you were supposed to have learned this year or whatever it may be. Okay. Right. But I don't think that's the right frame. I think the right frame is we are in a situation where we have a system that's meant to teach people certain content at a certain rate. And that system is faltering right now. And the system is faltering because of external factors. Okay, that's all fine. But the fact is that the human students, right, still have capacity. Yes, they are under more stress in a lot of ways than they ever have been before. They're certainly under an unusual amount of stress, and their capacities may be diminished because of those things. But we still have an entire year to learn stuff. And I want to advocate for the idea that this is not the year to worry about whether you've learned pre-calculus. This is the year to learn how stress affects you. This is the year to learn how to manage stress. This is the year to learn how much of your focus on your academics is intrinsic and how much is extrinsic. And be honest with yourself about that. If you're doing calculus so that you can get a grade, so that you can get to college, so that you can have a career, so that your parents will be happy, acknowledge that that's what's happening and deal with the problem as it exists. And if you're in calculus class because you find it interesting, be honest about that as well. I think that while very few students are going to be able to take on an entire academic year of full rigorous academic learning in this year, if you learn a third of what you're supposed to learn, but you gain self-awareness, but you gain some sort of self-oriented humility, you gain some skills, some sort of, support skills that help you become more resilient and more flexible. Mm-hmm. Dude, you got a great education this year. Right. Your GPA may not fully reflect it yet, but now when I'm interviewing that kid, I'm not looking at how much calculus she didn't learn. I'm looking at how resourceful she is because she got through that year.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a great point. I love resilience. I love throwing that in there. It's an amazing characteristic to adopt. And I think kids, everyone can adopt it. It's a little bit easier, I think, and we're probably a little bit more neuroplastic when we're younger. We're always neuroplastic. But I think another one I want to throw in is discipline, which is basically like, how do I get this job done? And I think for some kids, they won't figure that out, and that's too bad. And I almost think that if I were a student under COVID, I wonder how good of a student I would have been. When I was in high school, I wouldn't have been very good. Now that I'm older, I think I can manage my own kind of processes better. But yeah, I think that some kids will be able to avoid having to instill discipline inside themselves. Other ones will learn it, and that's incredibly valuable.
No, think 2 steps ahead. Consider, I'll make it personal. My first year at MIT, I was not a good student, just straight up. Like, I was just used to throwing my big brain at problems and having them go away. And they gave me problems that were hard enough that that wasn't a successful strategy. And I simply flailed. And on top of that flailing, I was very anxious about it. To this day, I occasionally have like uncomfortable dreams about not being prepared for an exam.
Yeah, you and me both, by the way. Yeah.
But the thing is that extremely unpleasant set of experiences and my inability to rise to those challenges as fully as I would have liked to, right? Those experiences were the fuel for later fire that helped me build up systems such that if I were to go back to school today, only in my dreams would I not be prepared. In reality, I would be all good to go. And it's not because I have this intrinsic power. It's because I vowed, okay, that's never going to happen to me again. I can't have that.
But wouldn't you say you develop that skill over time, right? I mean, don't you think that's
sure.
like, yeah. So I mean,
it's not like I sat down the summer after college and I was like, okay, let me remediate all that. It's not like that.
Right.
But I mean, you have that sort of really ego shattering, unpleasant experience. And it's like, well, geez, I got to go back to the drawing board and figure this out. And over time, you pick up little things that assemble themselves into kind of an actual working mechanism for not having that problem again. So
I think COVID can accelerate that. I think COVID will hopefully,
for better or worse. Like my concern is that like the level of anxiety we're talking about here can be very high, right? So the tricky bit is, right, to get it to have this experience be formative and constructive, not shattering, not overwhelming.
Right.
In a way.
Right.
And that said, again, students and adults are more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. Even if we have a terrible year, we'll get some good stuff out of it. We just have to be patient with ourselves in the sense that, okay, we had a really rough year and it may be 5 years before we really reap the benefit there. It's coming. And in the meantime, we have to be patient with ourselves. But let's get back to some of the things that can make this year seem crushing for students and more to the point, right? Some of the remediation, some of the things we can do that help students have a more constructive experience. Because I think that,
yeah, good.
I think part of it is setting the bar in a different place. Like if I were a student right now and I were taking calculus and I had the expectation of getting a 5 on the AP exam, I would be setting myself up for failure. Like just throwing more intensity at that part of the problem is not going to be successful for most students. Wouldn't have been successful for me, even though that would have been my strategy at the time. Better to lower the bar and say, you know what, I'm going to learn some calculus here. I might get a 3. I'll retake the class if I need to. And give myself that sort of psychological space to actually do the learning. Because if I just beat my head against the book, I'm not really setting myself up for success, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. So you and I have, and I totally understand your perspective, and actually I dig it, and I'm tempted to adopt it too. But I think you and I are putting the onus in different places in terms of where like the systems that are broken are.
No. I'm still back on the bit of the stakeholders. I'm not saying it's the student's responsibility. I'm just saying, look, here's what a parent and a student response to this system can be to maximize constructiveness in this moment for you.
Yes, and so what I'm going to throw in there too is that the system hasn't changed enough to help students make that adjustment. So let me tell you an anecdote. I've got a student right now who is, she's lovely, she's brilliant, she's very talented, she's got some like exceptional, professional level dance chops that are, it's pretty cool. She's a really interesting kid. Okay. She's going to apply to the most competitive colleges out there. And she is stressed beyond measure right now. Because she's still being expected to do everything that she was going to do under the traditional model in terms of writing her essays and, getting her subject test scores and all that stuff. And she's feeling just overwhelmed, and you can understand. I mean, just like it's the same thing where the goal is still the same. The deadlines are still the same. The means to get there has radically changed. So I think that the onus of responsibility in terms of like making the system work writ large is on the system itself, is on the structures. Like I've been pissed off and you know, annoyed or whatever. I mean, like by the test date cancellations that we've had so far.
Sure.
At some point in April, SAT and ACT should have both said, we're canceling all the tests. There will be no tests for anybody for the rest of the school year, rather than keep it sort of like trying to maintain. We've been trying to maintain the same system throughout. We're like always grasping at that, and the tests keep getting canceled, and they don't happen in entire states geographically. And it's basically like trying to keep the system as normal and traditional as possible, but not allowing for the fact that like that's actually that goal is impossible.
You're arguing for moving away from moving from a trees level to a forest level perspective.
Yeah.
You're arguing for don't manage the details, get the big pieces right, right? Don't figure out whether this test date can squeak through. Just cancel them all in the beginning and let everyone plan accordingly.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Totally on board. And I think that students and parents can take on that same kind of useful higher level thinking in this moment by saying things like, you know what? We're not going to have 6 APs this year and expect to learn all that stuff. That's a good way to experience more stress than is not even than is healthy, than is useful, than is optimal. I mean, some stress is good, but like that's clearly over the line, right? I advocate for resetting expectations, and I don't mean just, resetting them lower. I mean setting them in different places. I really do believe in the case of your dance student, right? I think she should at least be exploring the possibility of a gap year or something like that.
Yes.
Of you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a year off from school. I'm going to focus on my dance because when I'm dancing, I'm happy and I need some happy right now. And she's going to move forward in that area. Or alternately, you know what? My body is really injured from these years of dance and I could really use a year off to recover and rediscover my passion for dance. I'm going to throw myself into academics. But like trying to straddle both of that's like one foot in each of two canoes, not going to end well. I don't know the student, like I'm speaking completely out of turn. I don't know. But I'm saying that big picture, right? Making those kinds of decisions and looking at the whole thing and saying, you know what? Okay, we got to write this year off in some sense. How can we get some value out of this? And how we can get some values, we can focus on some smaller things. We can, reconnect with some different goals. Or as I advocated for earlier, we can recognize that this is a prime opportunity, not one that anyone asked for, but whatever. We got the lemons, we're going to make the lemonade. Prime opportunity to deal with, okay, how do I comport myself in the middle of an impossibly stressful situation? What do I do? And I think a piece of it is I re-examine the expectations. Is it realistic to try to do all these things? Am I just going to break myself? Or am I one of those people, one of those rare people for whom it's like, that just makes me perform at a higher level? If that's you, more power to you, Jack. Like, right. I'm all about it.
Yeah. You were always going to be successful, that person.
Yeah. And for years, I thought I was that guy. Right. And it turns out I'm not. Like there is a level of pressure beyond which my performance just goes down. I think that's true for most people. Right. And if you're in that camp with me, right, and you're past the line, recognize you're past the line.
Right.
Absolve yourself of full responsibility. But let's think about, okay, what can I do in this moment to accomplish the goals here that I think are realistic and that still matter to me?
So these are the points we're making so far, I'd say, like in sum. Basically, you're saying we all can benefit from this disruption, and we all can do that by taking responsibility for our own situation and potentially doing things that are different, you know what I mean, that might feel lesser than what we've done before, you know what I mean, and that are untraditional.
For sure.
And then, sorry, real quick. And then the other thing I'd throw in is just basically like, and my point in addition to that is basically our expectations of ourselves and of our students should be not lessened, but adjusted,
They should be flexible.
Yeah, exactly.
We should account for that fact. And there's going to be plenty of time for finger pointing later. Oh, my school did this wrong. But like, not too many of the stakeholders are behaving irresponsibly, right? Most of the stakeholders are behaving responsibly and are doing the best job they can. And I believe, I'm inserting this into the conversation just to point out that when you said, okay, parents and students can take responsibility for the situation and their reactions to it. I agree with that, but I'm not saying, and that absolves all the other stakeholders of whatever they did to
Right.
contribute to it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying, oh, it's your fault, parents, your fault, student. Not at all. I'm just saying, own your own locus of control, respond to what you can, and trust. And I think that this trust is reasonable. Trust that if in this time you make some unusual decisions and you say, I'm going to step off the beaten path a little bit, I'm going to do this thing that I think is going to end better for me and the people around me.
Right.
It's a little unusual, but the times are unusual, so I'm going to do this unusual thing, right? I'm going to drop out of school and take, whatever.
Read all of Shakespeare,
Yeah, exactly. Great example, right? So I'm going to read all of Shakespeare, whatever, because it calms me and I find that's interesting and it's a thing that I can do and whatever. How many of the prestigious programs that you wanted to get into, or how many of the goals that you have, or how many of the future life plans are going to be derailed by your taking that unusual step? I would argue that in most cases, anyone who would evaluate you after the fact, who's worth his salt, is going to look at that and be like, damn, there is one smart human being.
Right.
I want that guy on my team. I want that young girl, now a woman, to head up this initiative. That's
I mean, it's back to problem solving. You know what I mean? It's creative problem solving.
right.
There was a recipe, there was a formula, and people always thought that, like, oh, you can do something a little bit clever to, like, get around that formula and the sort of cliches of how to beat the system or whatever. And if you write a book or you invent something, then you'll get into college or whatever. But you still needed to have the perfect GPA and the perfect test scores. But it's interesting, like, what if those, what if those are no longer the factors, which they won't be? What do you need to do? And
Yeah.
it really is a novel situation. I was always really annoyed. This is a little bit of a non sequitur, but I was always annoyed by this. Super annoyed, actually. This like old joke about kids who are on the wait list at some college, and the way they got in off the wait list is they sent a life preserver or like a buoy or something like that, and they were like, and it said, like, save me from the waiting list or whatever, to the admissions office, right?
Okay.
And that was like wisdom, that you should do that because that will show how very witty you are, and that you should get in off the wait list.
That might have been true the first time it happened. Sure.
Yeah, maybe the first time. For me personally, like, I find, like, low level wit to be sort of like worse than no wit at all. So yeah, I would throw that away or burn that, and then basically, like, discount that person, or consider them on their merits. But anyway, like, we need better creative solutions. That's my point. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need cheap ones. We need good ones.
And I think it's worth pointing out that there's a lot of failure involved. Speaking personally, as 2020 began to unfold, I'm thinking, well, geez, all of the systems that I've built in my tutoring practice with my team are built are really kind of finely tuned solutions to very particular problems.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the underpinnings of those problems are changed. I mean, the changing test dates is one example of that.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, for example, I have a program that prepares for a certain test. It assumes a certain level of academic rigor. That level of academic rigor isn't going to be met this year. Therefore, my finely tuned solution is no longer finely tuned to the current situation. So one of the things that I found myself doing is, okay, well, let me build out some techniques and do some continuing education and research and all this kind of stuff so that my team and I can build up certain skills that I anticipate are going to be really needed by students. And we built out all these programs and we did all this stuff, and many of them just met with crickets because I guessed the wrong thing. That isn't a skill they need, or it's a skill that I still think they need, but the parents haven't figured out they need, or they don't want to get it from me, or, who knows?
Yeah.
But my point is, like, what did I do? Did I have the perfect answer? No, I did not. I started marching in a direction that seemed sensible, started doing some stuff, and expected that 70% of what I did was going to fail. And that's how it goes. That's part of what being flexible is you try some stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we should maybe kind of take this to recommendations, I mean, like, get down to, like, what's worked for us and what's advice we could share with other people. And I think try things and make mistakes. That's a great piece of advice, like you have a creative problem to solve. It is a unique problem, and we're all in the same boat in that it's a challenge to all of us. And like I guess don't be afraid to come up with a novel solution. Because I think actually, just real quick, before I get back to the list of
Sure.
solutions here, techniques or whatever they are, I think a lot of students and families didn't respond after, like, under pandemic, be out of some fear, out of a little bit of like a little bit of fear of the unknown. It's sort of like a it's fight, flight, or freeze, and it was sort of a freeze mentality. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's just like, don't do anything because we don't know what to do, right?
Oh, sure.
So
Right.
so in a way, that's another piece of advice: is break out of that. Basically, say like, hey, we got to do something. We got to do something. And if online school is working for me, great, I'll keep doing online school. If it's not, then I'm gonna sit back and read all of Shakespeare. I'm going to get really good at my golf game. I'm going to take a year off of school, and I'm going to get, do something else that works for me. And then I'm going to come back to school the next year, and hopefully things will be back to normal. I think they probably will be. I think by fall of 2021, I think most likely we'll be able to use classrooms again. We'll see. But yeah, that's piece of advice number one, is like, realize that the problem is big, and that you may have to come up with a very creative solution for it, and like embrace that, accept that.
3 drives that I think we share as people. We want to be competent, we want to be autonomous, we want to be connected. That seems a pretty uh, doesn't seem too contentious, right?
Is that a Wes Carroll original right there?
No, 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 no. That's I think it's self-determination theory. That's a thing.
Well, that's great.
But like that's legit, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So God, I wish I could claim credit for that one. But um, what I want to suggest is that expectation really matters here. So let's look at competence.
Mm.
I'm a 10th or 11th grader, let's say, and I'm in the middle of this situation, right? Competence, if I hang the hook of competence on my calculus class, I'm going to have a hard road. But if I hang the hook of competence on becoming more resilient, now my environment is very well suited to the goal I've set in front of me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ditto autonomous. My 6-year-old is doing first grade, and she's kicking butt and taking names, not in the sense that she knows all the answers to the questions, but in the sense that, like, when she's done with class, she kind of runs around and, like, gets rambunctious with her brother and stuff, because she's been sitting in one place for half an hour, 45 minutes, or whatever it is. And that is an appropriate response afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to look at that and be, and it's so funny, right? Because I had those weeks of like, what are we going to do about this problem, without realizing it's not a problem, it's a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she was having this issue, and she was, just sort of on reflex doing the thing that made perfect sense. She's not hurting anybody. She's not breaking anything. It's like, okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I come back to focus and distraction.
Right.
And I want to point out that we think of distraction as like, the ad that pops up in the corner. But another kind of distraction is anxiety that I'm not going to get out of this school year what other people are demanding that I get, that I'm not going to, get accepted to the school. I'm not going to get the offer of whatever. I'm not going to, I'm going to disappoint my parents, whatever. And I think that it really makes a lot of sense to say, you know what, that is a distraction. I really need to increase my focus. But what does focus mean? Focus means that you are clearly looking at something. And one of the things that comes up a lot for me personally, as well as for many of my students in this time, is that the thing that I'm so used to being focused on is not the right thing to be focused on anymore. That's why I'm coming off as distracted. I mean, you and I talk about this, when the record light isn't on, from time to time. But I'm having a lot of difficulty this year just meeting certain metrics that I've set for my business, for my students, for the relationships with people who are important in my life, and I've got to recognize that some of those metrics don't make sense in this time. It's like, what? If my offerings aren't well tuned to what the marketplace needs at this time, educationally, whatever, It's because the marketplace is in chaos, and I'm just gonna double down on making sure the students that I do have what they need, even if what they have is something I'm not used to providing. You know, if they need to feel less anxious, if they need to feel more in control, well, I mean, I've got some of those skills. I'm happy to share with them how that stuff works. Um, anyway, I think that if we are going to double down on trying to have a productive year, then we have to look with the widest possible lens at what it is we are trying to produce with this productivity. Because a 5 on the AP Calculus exam is not going to be the right answer for most students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I actually I don't think we should go into this question right now. Like, and maybe we save this for the next episode, but like there is a potential radical rethink. It's like, what if it's not about an AP exam? What if it's not about getting a 5? You know what I mean? Like, what if we reinvent the entire system?
Did I tell you the time? Did I tell you about the time Seth Godin slapped me down?
No.
You know who Seth Godin is?
Yeah.
He's great, and he didn't really slap. He was very nice about it. But like, he made this post. Oh God, years ago when I was doing SAT, ACT as my main thing, right? Mm-hmm. He did this post about. I should have looked it up before we started recording, but he's basically railing against the sort of cookie cutter industrialization of school and how the SAT is sort of a part of that system and therefore part of the problem. And I mean, he made a very good point. But I was in the middle of that world, and I was in the middle of an SAT company where our goal was, look, we're going to use this SAT as an excuse to learn all these other skills that will actually matter in life. And so I made this blog post and I even linked it to him, and I was like, Seth got it wrong because this test is really valuable when you approach it the right way to gain all these other skills. And he said, yeah, no, you're just, you're making lemonade out of the lemons, but why do we have lemons in the first place? He had that sort of bigger picture perspective of, yeah, I appreciate that you're getting some good out of the bad system from his framing, right?
Yeah.
But why don't you fix the system? And I think that's what you're arguing for here.
Well, that's another, and that's a whole other episode, and a really good episode too, is basically like, why does COVID threaten the SAT and ACT? And the answer to that question in short is basically because no one likes the SAT or ACT. Besides me, no one likes it.
But see, I still come down on the same side that let me put it this way, right? Seth may be right, but I still maintain that if you're in the middle of a system that demands this thing of you, it is a good idea to think about, okay, what am I really trying to get out of this? Yes, I have to jump through this hoop, but I could jump through it forwards, backwards, or sideways.
Right.
I get to choose that much, and I might prefer to do it the way that serves my goals best.
I love, by the way, so I'm going to come back. I think I've got a pretty good conclusive thought, but before I get there, I love the... it's attributed to someone like Gauss. I don't think it was Gauss, but there's a physics exam paper, and it was basically like, how could you use a barometer to determine the height of a building? You know that one?
Well, you could drop it off the building and time how long it takes to fall, or
So that was the student answer.
You could let the barometer cast a shadow and compare it to the length of the shadow of the building. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
I love that.
Really, really, really funny and like really clever, and like it's solving the problem. Pointing out that like, sure, I could take the pressure reading if you want me to.
Yeah, totally.
However, I could use it. Like I could, like one of them was like I could measure the height of the barometer and then like count how many barometers tall the building is. That's pretty. We
totally have to find the link to that thing, but I think that's totally legit, right? Oh my God, I have such it's such a pet peeve of mine. And I mean, I know most teachers, it's a pet peeve for them too, but like, the teacher asks a question that is basically a variant on, please read my mind, right? Please do it in this way. You do it with this constraint. And it's like, dude, I'm not going to read your mind. Like, give me the actual problem. What is it we're trying to solve here? What do you want me to prove? If you want me to prove that I can use a barometer, say so.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So here's fundamentally where I think where we've been, and like the sort of, I think there still is a point of like, mild disagreement between us just in terms of like who's more responsible, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, the students, everyone's presented with a major challenge right now. Yes, I'll get to the point of disagreement. It actually really is a mild one. Students are presented with a unique problem and need to take big creative diverse, interesting solutions to help them live their best life, to develop their true skills. And those skills might not match the same skill profile that they were expecting to develop during the school year. Hold on. Let me finish. Come on.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, come on. I'm like trying to get through this.
Yeah, that's good.
The administrators are trying to figure out how to administer the same school year that they've administered before, because that's kind of what's comfortable and what's traditional. And they're realizing that they can't do that. And so there need to also be adjustments at sort of like the institutional level in terms of expectations on families, on students. And I think, oh my God, now I've lost the point of disagreement. That's amazing. Wow. Okay. You talk, it'll come right back to me. Anyway, go
Okay.
Go ahead.
Institutions can't adjust as fast as people can. So let the people do the adjusting for right now. The institutions are going to do it as fast as they can. And don't try to do it all at once. I heard you say, okay, let's do this huge monolithic thing of trying to refocus our goals and all this kind of good stuff. I feel like, no. This is not a time for getting grandiose. This is a time for looking back over the week's learning and saying, okay, how did this work? Well, I got my homework done, but man, am I stressed out. Okay, let's take a look at that. What was stressful about it? Well, I didn't manage my time well. Solvable problem. Let's work on that, right? Or, I just feel like it's too much and I can't do it. Okay, is that legit? Let's look at a calendar. Let's look at what you actually did. I spent 3 hours playing video games on Wednesday. Well, that didn't help. Like, do you need that in order to sort of keep your sanity and stuff? Because if so, all right, acknowledge that. But if not, maybe chuck it. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think this is one of those times when you get to rewrite the script on a number of different levels. It's not just what classes I'm going to take. It's, am I going to go to school? I mean,
right.
That might be a little bit overboard for a lot of our listeners, but I'm saying
maybe, but maybe it shouldn't be. I mean, the point of disagreement, I remembered, thank God, is where like the ultimate kind of like point of meeting of responsibility between student and institution, like where that is located. I think, and you were saying institutions take more time to change. My perspective on institutions is they're people too. You know what I mean? Like they've got to make responsive decisions in these moments. You know what I mean? They should have canceled the SAT and ACT. They should have. They could have saved a lot of people, including themselves, a lot of stress and uncertainty by acting with more decisively earlier on. But my point of view is basically, I think the institutions should allow for more freedom of the individual. You know what I mean? Like should basically like expect less of what they've traditionally expected in order to help the individual adjust.
Well, I think that's true. I know you frame that as concluding thoughts, so I guess I'm breaking the rule. I think that's true. I think one of the reasons that a lot of institutions are having a lot of anxiety now is that it's becoming clear that I, the student, can kind of put my middle finger up to some of the requirements of these institutions. And it's not on the institutions to decide whether or not they accept my going a different path. Like, I don't need the institution anymore. I mean, I think that's a big part of the conversation around why am I paying so much for remote college. It's not that I don't want to pay so much for remote college. It's that I'm wondering why I paid for college before. What good is college to me? Like, insofar as a degree from X university, demonstrates that I am, some elite blah, 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 and that opens doors for you. Okay. I mean, that might be legit, but, for most students, you're going to college to learn some stuff, and that might not be the best place to learn it in all cases, and colleges are realizing, oh yeah, people's default attitude that this is a thing you have to do is being challenged now. And maybe that's because it should have been challenged a while ago. Right. It's just, it's got the spotlight on it now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's even where we started this conversation, and that these are challenges that we have not met before. We haven't seen them before, and that's why we need novel solutions. And within those novel solutions might come the opportunity to fix things that we've been meaning to fix for a long time, but haven't, just because the system was working well enough.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm seeing in my parent community, right? I'm seeing a lot of parents. I mean, there are some parents who are like, look, we're going to get through the school year as best we can. But there are a lot of others who are like, yeah, I'm going to opt out of this part of a normal school year, whatever part that may be, because I can clearly see that for my family doing it in this other way is going to meet the core need better than the system that was constructed to do it in a time that isn't the middle of a pandemic, right? So I'm going to opt out, and we're going to do it our own way. I mean, the forward thinking of those parents are being careful to do that only in cases where it's not going to adversely affect other kids, of course. But fundamentally, I think there's a lot of that going on where it's just like, look, we can do this better. I mean, I can teach my kid more math in an hour than she can get in class in a week. But right, that means I've got to take the hour, and that's not a diss on her teacher. Her teacher is doing this for 20 kids at once, 26-year-olds at once. My God, I could never do that, and she's doing it. But I'm sorry, I don't mean to be going on a tangent. I just mean to be saying that there are a lot of options that you have right now, and now of all, like, teachers are uniquely receptive to, listen, we're going to skip math class and you can test us whenever you want to and she'll be up to grade. You know what I mean? Because it's like they're busy trying to make sure that the rest of the ship isn't sinking. And generally speaking, doing a good job of it, but at high personal cost in a lot of cases.
I think the lesson there is the ultimate lesson of this whole pandemic, which is, without offering it as a threat to anybody, but just saying we can do this better. And if that's the case, then let's think about ways that we can, So I think it's, and that's kind of my mindset in general anyway, always. Right. And my, my husband doesn't love that, because that means that there's always like a note on dinner. It's like, dinner could be more delicious next time if we simply fill in the blank. He's like,
well, but here we're getting into what I think of as our core disagreement here. You're talking about rallying the troops and agreeing on a change.
Right.
I'm talking about unilaterally reacting differently to the situation as it's presented.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right. That is that. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong. It's not like I don't think your goal here is valuable. Of course I do. It's just that acting unilaterally is the one piece that I can control.
No, it's a good point. I mean, I'm oriented from a different philosophical point of view. That one of my friends, I have this it's insanely brilliant friend. You know what I mean? This friend who, like, I mean, his intelligence and
makes the rest of us look bad. Yeah, no,
it dwarfs me. It's beyond. And he was like, he was puzzled by me because he found my point of view like interesting, and he hadn't heard it from other people. But he eventually said, he's like, I've got it. I figured it out. You're a romantic. And I think I am a romantic. I think I'm like the guy on the top of the barricades in the French Revolution, and like the Les Mis part of the French Revolution. You know what I mean? Where they don't win. Who's just like, we can make a better system. That's my romanticism, and I gotta live with it because it's all I got. It's my point of orientation, and I don't think I could change it even if I tried.
I think there's more conversation in that, but maybe not for today.
Yeah. Thank you for the conversation, and I hope this was helpful to other people. And I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we're running into problems, and we don't know how to solve them yet, but we're working on it. We're all working on it. Hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is to recognize, okay, I'm in the middle of this tough situation. Here are the steps that I've taken. Here are the outcomes that I've gotten. What am I going to do different next week?
Right. Yeah,
and that applies.
That's not a bad. Well, and there's time. Then time frame is an interesting question too. It's like next week, next month, this year. You know what I mean? Orienting your solutions around that mentality, I think, is a good idea too. Basically, let's do short-term solutions and let's do long-term solutions.
Individual and organizational.
Yeah, exactly. Those are our recommendations. So solve your problems in the short term and the long term, and on an individual and institutional level.
We're such idiots.
Jesus, it took us an hour and 10 minutes to get to that.
Oh my God. I hope that we said something smart at some point in the previous hour. That's awesome. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Ted. Thank you so much.
Yeah, likewise, Wes. Thanks, man. Good stuff.
Thanks for hanging with us. Click subscribe, ring the bell, tell a friend, leave a comment. You know the drill.